this is so exciting. Thank you guys for coming. And thank you to Blake for that introduction and to the Strand in general. This is really hallowed ground for me. I just have a very special love for the Strand. I mean, it's definitely my favorite bookstore. Don't tell the other ones. But it's also one of my favorite places in New York City in general. And I have a lot of favorite places. I really love New York City. It's my home. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you to Emily Raboteau. I'm so excited. She comes, she just elevates all the events with her presence. And you heard in that bio, we were placed together freshman year as roommates. And we became friends really quickly, and then we became inseparable. And it's just so funny to me. You see this picture that's up behind her, and this is us, like at 19, in college, dressed up like fairies for Halloween. And it boggles the mind for me to look at this picture and then think that here we are now. A, that we're still friends all these years later, and B, I look at this and I just think of all these like big plans we were hatching for our adult life. And it's kind of amazing because, I mean, they didn't exactly pan out the way we hoped. We didn't win Oscars or Tonys or anything yet, but it's very much in the spirit of what we hoped, don't you think? So it's kind of amazing for us to be here tonight, both of us authors. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from the book. And wait, this is Eleanor Park, so I'm not going to read from that book. The book starts when I'm 19, just about the age that you see in the picture, but I am going to read something from like halfway through the book. And it's funny, despite the dark subject matter, this is intended to be a funny book, so you have permission to laugh. That's my point. Feel free, I encourage it. I think it's self-explanatory. Tip for the secretly blind, number 10, on the sacrifices of pregnancy. When you become pregnant, your obstetrician will hand you a long list of seemingly harmless items that can kill or mangle your fetus. Monkfish, beware. Hibiscus tea, contraindicated. Peroxide, you want your kid to have arms or not. Do whatever you want with this list. As long as you don't drink the baby's weight in grain alcohol and stop shooting heroin, I'm pretty sure you'll be okay. There is, however, one item that should be on the list but won't be, since it doesn't pose a risk for most pregnant women. I'm talking about heels. Remember all those times you found yourself face down on asphalt because you missed a stair or got a heel caught in the crack in the sidewalk? Now think about hitting the pavement that hard with a baby inside of you. Lose the heels. Don't wean yourself off gradually. Just gather all your darlings together, toss them in a garbage bag, and leave them at the doorway of the Salvation Army, like a Santa Claus for the frugal shoe addict. Then proceed directly to Target and buy yourself a bunch of sneakers. Practical, frumpy, I haven't had an orgasm in 5 years and may never again, soccer mom sneakers. Yes, it's a sacrifice. Better get used to those. Chapter 10, Day of Thanks. My father froze, the hypodermic needle poised in his hand. What? He croaked. I don't have a parasite. I'm pregnant, I repeated. It wasn't how I'd planned on making the announcement, but desperate times call for desperate measures. For once, there was silence at the dinner table. The floor-to-ceiling windows in my parents' apartment were open, and I could hear the distant sound of cars honking 24 stories below. 10 pairs of eyes stared at me from around the table. What? My mother asked, her voice low. She was holding a wooden spoon in midair, dripping marinara sauce onto the tablecloth. Only her eyes moved, and they were in full panic mode. What? I thought perhaps they hadn't heard me right. This was the reaction I'd expect from, I'm moving to Canada, or I'm practicing Wicca, or I'm moving to Canada to practice Wicca. You're gonna be a grandma, David elaborated. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Then my grandmother made a strange gasping noise in her throat and began to sob, though it was anybody's guess whether they were tears of joy or anguish. "Mamma mia," she choked out, "we gonna have a baby." When a 27-year-old newly married woman begins vomiting incessantly for weeks on end, most people don't assume she contracted a parasite from her Hawaii honeymoon. Even if pregnancy doesn't pop up as the first explanation in most people's minds, chances are it presents itself as the second or third, certainly well before talk about running a CBC and differential stat. Of course, my parents aren't most people. To be fair, I did start the ball of paranoia rolling. Instead of telling them I was pregnant at first, I told them I had the stomach flu. It was going around, I'd explained, making its way through the English program at Columbia, where I was weeks away from receiving my master's degree. They bought this for a week or so before they smartened up. This was no stomach bug. "Listen, I don't want to alarm you," my father advised, "but you may have contracted Helicobacter pylori." "I really don't think so," I countered. "I'm sorry, but did you get your medical degree when I wasn't looking?" My mother barked. "Your father is a physician." In the eyes of my family, my father's medical degree makes him an expert in everything. Not just putting in a pacemaker, but assembling IKEA furniture and marinating chicken. He is the absolute best at doing absolutely everything. It's annoying, mostly because it's true. Drop the man on a desert island with a hanger and a pair of toenail clippers, and he'd build an entire civilization, complete with high-speed internet. Yet, despite his skill at nearly everything else, so far he was abysmal at detective work. When I declined my father's invitation for a blood test, my grandmother became apoplectic. "I beg you, per favore," Noni pleaded. "Listen to your father, he knows what he's talking about." "For God's sake, look at you," my mother went on. "You're wasting away." It was shocking, really, that women who'd experienced pregnancy firsthand would be so incapable of recognizing its most common symptoms. If I let this go on much longer, they'd blame my third trimester baby belly on too much Junior's cheesecake. The rational thing would have been to just tell my family I was expecting, but I put off sharing the news with them, and it wasn't just because I was superstitious about going public before the 12-week mark. I knew that once the announcement was made, it wouldn't be my baby anymore, but ours. I knew they'd hijack my pregnancy. When I was a teenager, in the face of my mother's dictums about what I could not wear and who I could not date, I'd yell, "It's my life," and my mother would yell back, "It's your life I gave to you." Despite the fact that I hadn't been a child in a decade, my mother still acted like the deed to my life was in her name and I was just some renter she had to hand the keys over to, who'd probably fucked the place up beyond repair. The woman still tried to order for me at restaurants, often implicating the waiter. "Oh, Nicole, don't get the chicken. You can get chicken anytime. You always order the wrong thing. Excuse me, sir, am I right? Isn't the veal better than the chicken?" My mother wasn't the only controlling one. There was my grandmother and Aunt Rita to contend with, and to a lesser extent my father too. There'd been a 30-minute debate the week before over what dress I should wear to my sister's rehearsal dinner. A debate that persisted despite me frequently yelling, "No one asked you," and "You know I'm going to tell my therapist all about this tomorrow, right?" If they could be so overbearing about something so inconsequential, imagine the hell they'd raise when it came to child rearing. It's no wonder I kept the news of my pregnancy under wraps for as long as I could. But during Mother's Day dinner in my 11th week, when my father revealed the blood test collection kit, I realized the jig was up. Within seconds, my grandmother was weeping, sporadically invoking heavenly beings, "Oh Dio, Madonna, Gesù mio," and kissing the side of my face so that it was soaked with tears. "You're happy?" I wanted to know. The intensity of feeling was clear, but what feeling it was precisely was harder to decipher. "Happy," she wailed operatically. This is a woman who has perfected the art of talking while crying, probably because she spends so much of her time doing both. Of course I'm happy, and why not? I'm gonna have a baby. I'm going to have a baby, I corrected her. That's what I said, Nornie replied, patting my belly. We're gonna have a baby. My sisters and cousin abandoned their places at the table, swarming around me with questions. Due date? Around Thanksgiving. Baby sex? Don't know yet. Planned? Yes, thanks for asking. Within a minute or two, my father was striding over, a crooked smile on his face, to shake David's hand and clutch me to his chest. My mother pulled me into an embarrassed embrace and joked about how no one asked her permission before making her a grandma. The mayhem had given them a chance to collect themselves, and the fanfare provided them with a cue, but I'd seen the panic in their eyes when I broke the news, and though they covered for it, the "what have you gotten yourself into" expression was unmistakable as it passed across their faces. So that's all I'm going to read. Now we're going to talk.
Congratulations, first of all, on the success of this book. Now that you've graced the cover of a in-flight magazine and been excerpted and profiled in just about every magazine on the newsstand currently, and newspaper, from the New York Times, the New York Daily News, to New York Magazine, to People, just to name a few. Do you feel that the measure of attention and success you've garnered for this book match up to what you dreamed at 19 of, becoming a movie star?
That's funny.
How does it compare?
It's interesting because it both exceeded my wildest dreams and also did not meet them in the way, that's the thing. We discuss this all the time. You always want more, but this is what has been so thrilling and exciting to me about this process of publication has been, the coverage has been amazing and it's very, very exciting, but what I didn't anticipate at all was that I would hear from so many people, readers. I've been taken entirely by surprise by the dozens of emails and messages I've received from people who are, most of them visually impaired, or loved ones, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, friends of people who are visually impaired. And these emails are so amazing. They just have me in tears all the time because people keep saying, I feel like I am reading my own story. And so that experience, I didn't know it would be so meaningful. It's what you always hope, but when you wrote a memoir, you write a memoir and it's your personal story, and I just didn't know if anybody would be interested in it at all. And I didn't dare to dream that not only would they be interested, but that it would have meaning for them and actually have an impact. So yeah, it totally exceeded my expectations.
So great. The passage that you just read, I was struck by the memory of how young you were actually in our cohort of friends from college. You were the first to get pregnant, the first to get married, and the first to get pregnant with your first son, Giovanni. And I wonder to what degree your diagnosis with retinitis pigmentosa and knowing that you would eventually lose your eyesight, to what degree that knowledge made you choose to make those decisions on the early end in the spectrum of our, perhaps not in the universe, but in our spectrum of friends?
Right. It was a huge factor. I mean, it helped that I was gung-ho. I mean, like, my biological clock was set super early, so it had been ticking already for a long time. So I was something I really wanted anyway, but I think had that not been a factor, you know, who knows, I probably would have waited and, you know, established my career or investigated that avenue of my life. But I knew it was something I wanted more than anything else, and I knew that it would be easier to do with, you know, all 5 of my senses in functioning order. So it totally moved it up the priority list. And I feel like it wasn't just it didn't just do that for parenting, but for all of the things that have been important to me. It was, you know, I talk about my carpe diem strategy in the book, and that was just, you know, kind of like the biggest instance of it, the most important one. But yeah, I was like the first in that brave new world of parenthood by so many years, and I'm glad that I did, of course. But it was a little bit, you know, terrifying to do it that way.
Yeah, but I remember that in addition to becoming famous someday, your big dream at that age was to be a mom, was to have kids. Even then, you loved babies.
I was like, even as a teenager, I mean, thank God I didn't act on it. Then I showed, you know, good restraint. But as soon as I mean, it was in a way the looming deadline that the diagnosis gave me just helped me to be decisive. It's like, you know, I knew I didn't have a lot of time to screw around. I mean, I screwed around plenty, but in the general sense.
Yeah, you really did.
Guys. But, you know, like, I didn't have time to waste. So that's a very valuable thing to know.
Right. Because you wanted to see your children. You wanted to know what their faces looked like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I look at that picture of us, I think it's remarkable how, like, thin we were and how great our skin is. But it also,
we were so hot.
I know. But it also so, like, effortlessly hot. Now it takes so much more effort. But I'm remembering the day that I first met you, freshman year. It was like the happiest accident of my life, almost, to be placed into a college dorm room with Nicole, who is really contrapuntally different than I think you've always been a glasses half full person, which is sort of how your book is being described, whereas I think of myself as more pessimistic and a glasses half empty type of person. But I remember very well that day where your entire family was in the room. My mother dropped me off with a duffel bag full of possessions, and Nicole's entire family was in this little quarters. Noni was, like, sweeping. Your mom had a surgical mask on and was putting down poison so that they're, like, for mice. Your dad was setting up your computer. Courtney was still really little and was jumping up and down on the bed. And Melissa was, like, sulking in the corner because it was all taking too long. And I was so, like, kind of blown away by the, like, excess of your family, like the largesse of it, and the love. And I think you've done such a fabulous job capturing them in this book, in this memoir, which is equally, I think, a Valentine to family, both your family of origin and the family that you created with your husband David. And I think the arc of the book is, you know, as you've described, that after this diagnosis, you know, that you were told at 19, this age, more or less, you're going to be blind within 10 to 15 years, which is a bomb to be dropped into anybody's lap. But at this age, like, when you're so young, when I was saying, the arc of the book is kind of like, well, this information that was hard to swallow made you have this kind of carpe diem strategy to enjoy life to the fullest. You went on a tour of Europe with your sister. You went to circus school. You had lots of, you know, affairs with interesting men before, you know, settling down with the love of your life. But from my perspective, you were kind of always this effervescent life-loving person. So I'm wondering, in the moments, during the diagnosis and in the years after, as your eyesight has diminished, what have you reached for to sustain your optimism? For those of us who aren't naturally inclined that way, like what has kept you so buoyant?
Oh my God, that's a good question.
I know.
It's like you're advertising me and how great I am. I don't know. I mean,
well, would you describe it as faith, or in a way the book it makes it feel like your children?
Yeah, I think that was a big. I mean, I do think like part of it is just temperament. I mean, the flip side of what you describe is that I really didn't face or confront the diagnosis. So that's another great strategy. If you just pretend bad things aren't happening, they don't make you sad at all. But I think, having the kids definitely for the past decade, because the past decade is when my eyesight's really gotten bad, and so you can't even stop to think about that. I describe it a little. I wrote that motherlode piece, and I describe how sometimes, I do worry and get sad about it, but then the kids are always there and they're a great distraction. And they put everything in perspective. And I think before them, other things did this. My love of theater and my passion for books, and then I met my amazing husband, and and the children do it even more so, but they put everything in perspective, so you feel grateful for what you have, and then they also don't give you any time to think.
Right, you can't really afford the luxury of a depression
so
when you have three
children. If you want to be optimistic, just have a lot of children and no childcare, and you will always be thinking of what's right in front of you.
Right. 2 weeks ago, I brought a friend of mine to your book launch in Brooklyn, and after your reading, she admitted to being kind of perplexed by you because you don't appear blind, although at this point you are legally blind. And I'm wondering if you could talk maybe about two things. One, about the challenge of writing about blindness for a sighted readership has been, writing about what it's like to not be able to see, to see in the way that you used to be able to. And two, how do you reconcile your blindness with people's perception of you as sighted and capable, because you don't at this point use a cane or have a seeing eye dog. So I think there's some cognitive dissonance for people who see you, walking about like you can see, which you can.
Which I can. Yeah, it's a challenge, and it is so funny. I mean, I do feel like in this funny liminal space between these two worlds. And now with the book stuff and the publicity, I feel like people read it and they're like, oh, she's so blind. And then I'll show up to do something, like I did this talk show, and they're like, oh, wait, are you her? You're not blind. Oh my God, you were cured. And then I'm like, no, I wasn't cured. And and then I have to explain, I'm partially sighted. It's mostly peripheral vision, so I can kind of pass very well. So that's part of what I hope the book does to a mainstream audience. I hope that that's kind of an awareness raising benefit of it, because one of the things I didn't know until I was diagnosed at 19 is that there are increments of seeing, and that it's a spectrum. I sort of felt like you either blind like Stevie Wonder, or you're totally functional, you could totally see. So that's something that a lot of people who read the book didn't know, and I think that it's illuminating, and I think that's a nice thing that the book does, is introduce this concept. Because when I've spoken to other people who read the book who are also visually impaired, this is something they say all the time, like, people don't understand. People tell me, people who use a cane but have some eyesight, people get totally perplexed because they're like looking around and so people on the subway are like, are you pretending? Why are you? And people don't do it to be insulting. It's something that people don't know about. So I'm excited to share that information. There was another part to your question, Emily.
Yeah, the challenge of describing partial vision, like finding words for that for somebody, because you've also, it's been years since, I mean, I won't give away your age, but it's been years since you were diagnosed at 19, and you've progressed, your eyesight has progressively diminished.
Right.
And I think you're very successful in the book at describing what's happened to your rods and cones, or scientifically, and how, you know, your peripheral vision has kind of ebbed away. But I wonder, since it's been a slow process, if it was hard for you to find that language, because it's just something that's normalized for you.
Yeah, I think it totally was. And it was something that I didn't do at first in first drafts of the book, because you just, you take for granted. It's one of those things that you're like, yeah, everyone sees the way I see, So people who read it, early readers like you, maybe you were the one who told me. It might have even been you who said, we just need to see through your eyes a little more. So you literally have to break it down. What do you see? What don't you see? And then once that was pointed out to me, I had to keep reminding myself to just keep putting it in. And it felt so onerous and tedious and boring and depressing. I didn't enjoy writing that part of it at all. But I thought it was very important to give people a sense of and to also, as time went on, to update people in the book, update readers. Now we're at chapter 4, and here's the state of my vision, and now we're at chapter 7, and here's the state of my vision. And it was hard to find the language, because I'm sort of I don't know, what do you people see? This is what I see. I don't know. But I do have vague memories of,
But you also have tricks that you describe in the book.
Yeah.
For example, you would reach out your hand when meeting somebody before they did, so that you would make sure that you wouldn't miss a hand, right? That it would be in your sight of vision, right. Or that you would order, I'll have what she's having, because right. You couldn't read the menu at certain points, right? That there were kind of in the stages where you were in denial about your blindness, or kind of protective or secretive about it, that there were tricks that you used, right?
Yes. No, I had a whole arsenal of them. And the funny thing is, I didn't even, they become so instinctual.
Right.
And many of them are just useful compensatory techniques.
Right, not necessarily tricks, but just coping strategies.
But a lot of them were worthless. A lot of them were huge wastes of time.
Like what?
Maybe I wanted to eat something besides a Caesar salad every once in a while.
Right.
The one thing that I've used that's been so revolutionary is a magnifier.
Right.
I didn't use it for so long, and the ridiculous lengths I had to go to in order to decipher text or pretend I was deciphering it was just such a colossal waste of time. And now I have an app on my iPhone, and it's just right there, and it just makes life so easy. So it's interesting. All of those resources were right there available, but because I was so stubbornly, resistant to confronting this thing, I couldn't avail myself of them.
Right.
And I will never forget when I went. I discuss it in the book, but I went to the Adaptive Technology Center, which sounds super boring, but it's a magical place where they teach blind and visually impaired people how to use technology. And the guy there showed me how to text, because he showed me how to magnify the screen of my iPhone so I could text, and it was like a hallelujah moment. Like angels were singing. It was like a miracle, an old school miracle. I was like, now I can text.
Right, because this is a major way that we communicate now. And I remember you were kind of behind with that because you were misspelling. You were the fear of misspelling everything. Right,
and I couldn't read the text people would send me. So I would be like, oh, I just don't like texts. I'm such a Luddite. I'm just, but the truth was I couldn't see them. So my phone would like ding, ring, and I'd be like, shit, stop texting me. I know someone is texting me, but I don't know who you are or what you're trying to say. So all I know is I'm missing things all the time. So when he showed me that, I was like, that's when I got invested in the coping game, because I was like, coping has some good benefits.
You can manage the world a little more easily.
There's a lot you will do when you learn how to text. That's big incentive.
Yeah, I wonder if you can tell us a little more about some of the other coping strategies you learned, how you've talked about this with your kids, and then also maybe moving forward, what kind of coping mechanisms you might anticipate. For example, you've been trained on a cane but don't use it yet, that I know of. Right. But I wonder if you imagine that you will at some point, or have given thought to what might happen, a few years from now or whenever.
Yeah, the good thing about that being trained with the Commission for the Blind is they force you to do all this stuff. I say you. Me. Other people probably are very compliant, but they forced me to do all of this good for me stuff that I did not want to do. And I kept being like, I don't need this. And they kept being like, okay. It was like I was a child. They're like, we know, but you have to do it. And then it's like they gave me the medicine, and afterwards I was able to realize, oh, that was real. I'm so glad I did that. Thank you for forcing me. So they made me look at all of these crazy devices that I don't need, thankfully, but may one day. And my mobility instructor, Esperanza in the book, who I love so much, she kept saying, it's going to make you feel better just to know that this is there and to know that there's all of these tools that you can rely on. And it totally did. So, it's a crazy thing to say, but there's never been a better time to be blind. If you're going to go blind, now is the time to do it. Maybe wait 10 years, because I bet it'll be even better. But I don't know how people used to do it. Even just the iPhone, there's a crazy app, which I don't need yet, but it will you take your iPhone and point it at things and it tells you what everything is. It'd be like polka dot shirt, wooden table. So I just thought that was crazy. That's so cool. So there's a million crazy things like that that are out there. And then there's the cane. So I have the cane. Yeah. And I'm sure I will need it, but for now it's in my closet. But I have showed it to my kids, and what's cool about it is, because I've told them about it for so long, they sort of always knew that I had bad eyes, so it's not at all like a fearful or sad thing even. It's so matter of fact. They're so matter of fact about it. And so I was with my daughter, my 7-year-old. We were walking down the street, and she loves to pet dogs. So she saw this dog, and she was petting it, and the owner said, oh, he's blind. And she perked up, and she's like, oh, my mom's blind. But totally oh my God, my mom has curly hair. And then the guy looked at her what are you talking about? Your mom is not blind. She's like, oh, she's not blind yet. She's half blind, but she has a cane. She doesn't use it, but she might one day. And it was so casual and matter of fact. And that one moment really made me feel oh, this has all been worth it. This was the right, those moments where you're validated. You come out of this long journey, you're oh, I'm so glad I took that long and difficult journey, because this is what I did it for, so that it wouldn't be some fearful, shameful thing. So I think, who knows? They're young. I can still traumatize them a lot. But for now, it's okay.
We're running a little short on time, but I wanted to see if any of you guys had questions for either Nicole or Emily. If you want to give me a wave, I'll bring you a mic. We've got one in the back.
This is a question for both of you. I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the challenge of writing memoirs in particular. I think there's two things that strike me when I read a memoir, like how do you decide what to, you're relating dialogue and very specific scenes going back, years. How do you decide how you're going to represent those? Because as a person who writes fiction, I'm like, how do you remember all that stuff? And so how do you make that? And I know every memoirist kind of makes a different call about how they're going to do that. And I'm wondering for both of you how you went about making that decision.
You want to talk first, since I've been talking so much?
I think there's a lot of fictional techniques involved in the process of writing a memoir, where you're constructing scenes from memory that transpired years ago, and then you have to be very careful now to add, because this is such a litigious society, right? Like a little wording in the beginning. What did yours say? Do you remember?
Yeah, mine was like, the names and identifying characters have been changed. Like this is probably, this is how I remember it. Memory's a crazy thing. You might remember it differently. And like, if you do, write your own memoir.
Yeah, I said something like alternate perspectives on the same events could be equally true.
There you go. Yeah, but Emily's memoir's amazing. They're selling it here. It's called Searching for Zion. It's wonderful. It's so beautiful and keenly insightful. So she had written her memoir right before I wrote mine, so it was very helpful because she could, you were like my mentor, like my memoir mentor, and you told me about this Vivian Gornick book that was very helpful, because when I started writing my memoir, I don't know if you did this, it was literally my whole life. It would have been the most boring book you've ever read. It was like, then I went to the library when I was a child and I read this book about Marilyn Monroe, and it was very hard for me to know what was relevant. But one of the things that you told me, and maybe it was from the Gornick book, was, this is a very specific story, and you have to be really careful about just including what's relevant to the story and sort of advancing it, your life through this one specific lens. So that was really good advice. I cut so much, stuff that I was like, oh, but this will be really good, and I kept trying to justify it. It's kind of related, and then I knew, like, no, it's just not relevant to this story.
Right, because a memoir is a different beast than an autobiography or a biography, right? It's one very specific element of your life. So Nicole's memoir is really, it's very much about being a mother, like coping with being a mother while losing eyesight, right? And also embracing life. And there are many hats that Nicole wears, aside from being a mom and aside from losing her eyesight. But for the purpose of this book, that was her focus, right? And everything was filtered through that lens.
Any more questions? Come on. Okay. One in the front.
I think one of the most interesting things that I learned about this book was that it didn't start out being about your eyesight. It was originally going to be more of a mommy memoir. I just thought it would be interesting if you could talk about that and how it came to evolve to be about your eyesight.
Yeah, it was very funny. I had been writing for years for parenting magazines, and then I had like a mommy blog, and so I conceived of a memoir that was really like it was basically this memoir if you took all references to going blind out of it. So it had like my crazy Italian American family and like, oh, my adorable children, and my journey as a parent, but it was very diverting and funny, I think, but it really didn't have very much substance. It was sort of like, what's the point of reading it? And I mean, I totally tried to sell that book. Nobody wanted to buy it, shockingly. Like, it wasn't my great, I didn't self-correct. I couldn't sell it. And then I was like, oh, it's such a, really want to write this memoir. What can I do? What angle can I take?
It was always a no-brainer to me. And I remember the phone call I got from you where you said, like, Eureka, my Achilles heel is my cash cow.
Yeah.
Because maybe that was my terminology, but the idea was, you need some conflict, and Nicole has this incredible conflict in her life, and it's also a lesson, I think, to be learned from, which is that, something really sucky which happened to Nicole is something that she endured and survives with aplomb every day.
Aplomb. I like that.
I think that's about all we've got time for tonight, but thanks so much to all of you guys for coming out, and thanks to Emily and Nicole for that great talk.